This is an MJA Inc. Investigations warning. This MJA podcast is rated E for explicit. Some details of a case and language used on this podcast might be upsetting to some of our listeners. Listeners' discretion is advised. And for those who are still with us, kick back and enjoy the show. No greater honor will ever be bestowed upon an investigator than when they are entrusted with an investigation into the death of a human being. MJA Inc. Investigations believes in these words. You can read past publications that MJA considers it an honor for us to work on the cases that we do. Welcome to our MJA podcast. This series, A True Conspiracy. This is Chapter 1, Part 2. The Mysterious Death of Marcus Merritt Sr. We are coming to you from our home office in Plattsburgh, New York, located in the Adirondack Mountains. My name is Mark, and I will be your host for tonight's show. Joining me later on the show will be our co-host, Olivia. Joining Olivia and I on the show will be our special guest, Royce Eckley, who is the mother of Marcus Merritt Sr. Our conspiracy begins on January 4th, 2013, when Marcus Merritt Sr. was found deceased in his home, with him being located in his bedroom. From all indications, Mr. Merritt died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. On January 4th, 2013, Mr. Merritt was talking to his estranged wife and texting her while she was at work at a hospital when she claims the phone went dead. The estranged wife thought something was wrong, and she called her parents to go over to the house to see if everything was okay and said she was on the way home. My big question to her, if she thought something was wrong, she was at a hospital, so why didn't she send the EMTs to her home? When her parents arrived at the home, they claimed the house was locked. It has never been clearly explained how they got into the home. After entering the home, Mr. Merritt was found dead in the bedroom by his father-in-law. The police was called, and the first responder was a parish deputy sheriff who found the in-laws in the bedroom, and the deputy had to give them 2 stern orders to leave the home. On the scene arrives the chief of police of Leonville, Louisiana, Joseph Noel, who told the parish deputy that he would handle the case because he was friends with the family. So, the parish deputy left the scene. At that time, Mr. Merritt's death was ruled a suicide, and his lifeless body was taken directly to the funeral home. Yes, you heard me right. There was no autopsy or gunshot residue tests done on Mr. Merritt. The ME or coroner didn't even see the death scene or Mr. Merritt's body. Once again, you're hearing me correctly. Mr. Merritt's barber of 10 years done his hair for the burial. He saw no injuries. When the barber finished his hair, he asked the funeral home attendants what happened to Mr. Merritt. He was told Mr. Merritt put a gun in his mouth and killed himself. When Mr. Merritt's mother, Royce Eckley, heard the details of what happened and what was done and what wasn't done, she had a lot of questions. Miss Royce never believed her son would kill himself and had no reason to do such a thing. Mr. Merritt was days away from moving to Texas with a new job, leaving his estranged wife behind. Royce Eckley first contacted MJA by email on March 24, 2014, asking for our help. Her second email was on April 3, 2014. Her third email was on April 8, 2014. She was sending us documents in these emails. My first email to Miss Royce was on April 12, 2014. MJA done our research and decided to work on the case. On May 30th, 2014, MJA had Miss Royce fill out an intake form giving MJA permission to work on her son's case and to speak for her and her family when needed. Royce Eckley wanted her son's body exhumed to have a proper autopsy done, since at the time of his death an autopsy wasn't done. MJA emailed to Miss Royce on June 14, 2014, and was telling her our intentions was to have her son's body exhumed, and no matter what turned up or didn't turn up, our next step was to have Mr. Merritt's case heard at a death inquest that could lead to a grand jury. I went on to tell her this was going to take a while to do things in the proper way. By June 14, 2014, MJA had 2 staff meetings with 16 staff members online concerning Mr. Merritt's case, lasting 4 hours and 4.5 hours. On June 27, 2014, I called the Leonville Police Department to tell them that MJA was working on the case and what our intentions were. They passed me on to the Louisiana State Police, and I talked to the detective in charge of the case and told him our intentions, and I would hope they would help us in this matter, for they would be receiving a Freedom of Information Act document in the next few days, which they ignored. Then, before July 4th, 2014, I interviewed Royce Eckley, who is the mother of Marcus Merritt Sr. By July 4th, Ms. Royce had provided us with 20 documents. Independently, 7 of our staff members who knew nothing about the case was given documents. We redacted the names in the state so they was to only have the facts dealing with the case. By redacting certain things is a way to make sure their findings are pure and simple and with no names, and state they couldn't do research on the case that might cloud their findings. All 7 staff members in their reports, their findings were not suicide, but homicide. Then I knew without question we were on the right path. Let's take a short pause for the cause, and when we return, we will talk about all the red flags saying something was wrong about Mr. Merritt's death. Be back in a moment. Welcome back to our MJ podcast. This series, A True Conspiracy. This is Chapter 1, Part 2, The Mysterious Death of Marcus Merritt Sr. Here is just a sample of the red flags concerning Mr. Merritt's death. The Leonville Police Chief, Joseph Noel, waved off the parish deputy, saying he was a personal friend of the family and he would be working on the case. When Mr. Merritt was discovered as being deceased, there was no autopsy done. He was taken straight to the funeral home. Therefore, no tox screen was done on Mr. Merritt. No gunshot residue test was done on Mr. Merritt or anybody else that was found at the scene. The death gun wasn't tested. Leonville Police Department and the Louisiana State Police said no photos were taken of the death room or of Mr. Merritt. No matter what the cause of death is, you still must take photos of the scene for case history. One of the biggest mistakes the Louisiana State Police made was thinking if they stalled Miss Royce, she would just fade away. That's not happening. She is a mother on a mission, seeking justice for her son. After MJA started filing document after document to the courts, to the prosecutor's office, to the Louisiana State Police, to the governor's office, to the Justice Department, and being on podcast after podcast, we started to get some attention from the Louisiana State Police. Then in May of 2016, the Louisiana State Police was notified that Mja, Royce Eckley, and Sevgi of Together We Stand was going to be interviewed on a national radio show about Mr. Merritt's case, and that's when the Louisiana State Police decided to conduct a death investigation. In May 2016, Mr. Merritt's estranged wife was given 2 polygraph tests by the Louisiana State Police. Both were ruled inconclusive on the 3 questions related to Mr. Merritt's death. When the Louisiana State Police questioned the Leonville Police Chief Noel, he admitted to the Louisiana State Police that he had washed down the death gun. The Louisiana State Police even tested the Police Chief Noel's service gun. The national radio show aired on May 25, 2016, and we named names and our concerns about Mr. Merritt's death. Mja, with the help of Together We Stand out of California, our request to have Mr. Merritt's body exhumed was granted, and he was exhumed on June 2nd, 2016. Our request for the autopsy, that we needed 24-hour notice before the autopsy because Royce Eckley wanted me in the room during the autopsy, for I have been involved with over 340 death investigations. That didn't happen, and it was by chance that Miss Royce made it there on time. That tells me they didn't want me in the room because of the experience I have had, and from the videos, it was a very sloppy autopsy that I truly feel I could have done a better job myself. Not long after the autopsy, Royce Eckley received a flash drive that stated it was from the Louisiana State Police of all the files and 4 videos. It was everything Mja had been asking for concerning the case, and also info we didn't ask for. The only thing we didn't get was the text messages between Mr. Merritt and his estranged wife on the day Mr. Merritt died. 2 of the videos was of the estranged wife's polygraph test, and 2 of the videos was of the so-called autopsy. They claim they retrieved a bullet from Mr. Merritt's head, but the video camera was set so far back you couldn't really see what they were doing. Okay, they have the death gun and a bullet, and they can't match the bullet to the gun. The talk screen comes back that Mr. Merritt ingested house cleaning products that isn't a byproduct of embalming fluid. It also stated that Mr. Merritt had a drug cocktail in his systems of uppers and downers. Mr. Merritt didn't take any drugs of any kind. He smoked weed at one time, but had stopped doing that. In the files was a death certificate from the estranged wife's first husband, who died in a 1-car accident with no witnesses. We never asked for that. Also was the photos of the death room with Mr. Merritt still in the room, which they claim they never took any photos. Speaking of the death room photos and the blood evidence, after looking at the death room photos and the blood evidence for hours on end, I came to the conclusion that there was someone else in the room with Mr. Merritt. The room was staged for the simple fact it defeats the laws of physics and gravity, where Mr. Merritt bled out, and questions of the position of the gun and where he came to rest. It's not possible. You can't defeat the true evidence when it's backed up by science. I then had another staff member to look at the death room photos and blood evidence to write me a report on their findings. That staff member came to the same conclusion as I did and wrote out the factors which also matched mine. But we didn't stop there. We sent out the death room photos and the blood evidence to an educated, trained mechanical engineer. Their findings were the same but in more detail, so MJA released the report and a news reporter published it, and the report made its way to 5 other southern states. There is no question that Mr. Merritt is a victim of homicide. I say to the Louisiana State Police, read the room and the blood evidence, and if we are wrong, show us we are wrong. It's that simple. Prove us wrong. Using every file that the Louisiana State Police released to Miss Royce, MJA and Miss Royce has proven without a doubt that Mr. Merritt is a victim of homicide. Even as we speak, the Louisiana State Police are still withholding information and photos from us. Our request is for the state of Louisiana to conduct a death inquest or grand jury to hear Mr. Merritt's case. As I said earlier, one of the biggest mistakes the Louisiana State Police made was thinking if they stalled Miss Royce, she would fade away. That's not happening. She is a mother on a mission seeking justice for her murdered son. Let's take a pause for the cause, and when we return, our co-host, Olivia, will be on the line, and joining us will be Royce Eckley, the mother of victim Marcus Merritt Sr. Be back in a moment.
And I'm haunted in a dream.
Welcome to our MJ podcast, this series, A True Conspiracy. This is Chapter 1, Part 2, The Mysterious Death of Marcus Merritt Sr. We have Olivia, our co-host, on the line. How are you doing tonight?
Doing good.
And also joining us is our special guest, Royce Eckley, who is the mother of Marcus Merritt Sr. Miss Royce, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing okay, thank you.
And can you please tell our viewers and listeners how you came to contact MJA?
I had been Googling, trying to find somebody that could possibly help me with this. And you and I figured out how I did find you years after I found you. I was in a Yahoo group, and there was a lady named Lily.
Yes.
And she, I had told her about what had happened and everything, and she was like, Royce, I think I know somebody that maybe could help you. I want you to contact them. So I, sent you an email, and I didn't hear anything from you. And then I sent you another email, and I didn't hear anything from you. And then I think maybe about the third time, you emailed back, and then you called me.
Yeah.
And, told me that you had gotten my email and you were going to have a meeting with your people and that, you would get back in touch with me. And that's how we got together.
And, folks, let me tell you a little about Lily. Lily had a young daughter that was murdered, and it went unsolved for around 25 years. And Lily kept pushing and pushing. They finally got the guy. He was convicted. And not long after that, Lily passed away. And at that time, 2 years after her death, the guy that got convicted for her daughter's murder got a retrial. But he was convicted again. But my blessing was that Lily didn't have to go through the retrial.
Right.
And can you tell our listeners and viewers how you came to get in contact with Together We Stand?
Yes. I was on Facebook, and Sevgi, which is the founder of Together We Stand, was talking to someone else and, saying the different things they could do and try and help them. And I commented and said, I wish you could help me. And, she kind of asked what was going on. And I told her, and she was like, okay, send me, and, we'll get started on it. And she laughed. And one time she did a podcast, Mark, remember, and she was like, and I thought, usually with parents, we have to pull teeth, get a couple of little emails and all. She said, and she sent me this packet, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I had, just all the different little things I could do. I'd reach out to people, Google different topics or whatever and see if I could, reach out to somebody and get them to help. And, that's how I met Sevgi.
Okay. And isn't it true that we have been interviewed by a national radio show out of St. Louis and twice by Salida McCall's show and 3 interviews on a radio show that is broadcasted from the United Kingdom?
Yes. Salida is from Louisiana, and she's interviewed, had us on her show. And then Kervin Julian is in the United Kingdom, and he's had us on there, I think, like 3 or 4 times
Yeah, 3.
on his show.
3. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so your son's case has got a lot of exposure worldwide. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, it seems to. And, we're just going to keep pushing until the worldwideness finally opens up and somebody says, hey, we see something is wrong also. But it's like I said to Charles Cravens, who was the former district attorney in St. Landry Parish, why is it that anybody who reads anything about this, hears anything about this, can automatically see something is wrong, except y'all? What is that about?
Yeah. Okay, Olivia, you can ask her the next questions.
Okay, Royce, could you tell us the last time that you saw Marcus alive?
Yes, it was at Christmas time.
Okay, you were spending time with him and his family, correct?
Right, at Christmas.
All right. How many days were you visiting him? How long were you planning on being with him and his family?
We got there. Christmas that year fell on a weird day. I think it was like on a Wednesday.
Okay.
And so my fiance and I got there Christmas Eve, but he had to, and then Christmas was that Thursday, and he had to work that Friday. So we were coming back home, like Christmas night. So I was I was only there for a couple of days that time.
Now, did everything seem fine with your son during your visit? Did he act strangely, or was he normal?
No. Yeah, it was okay. We could kind of tell like it was a little tension between him and his wife,
right.
Because he had found out about the affair and all. But otherwise, no, he was just like Mark normally was, laughing, talking, and they had even gotten up Christmas morning and fixed Christmas dinner, for us to have dinner before we left. So it was, everything was normal. I always made sweet tea when I went there, and and when I was hugging him, when we were getting ready to leave, like he hugged me, and then how you'll stand somebody back, and he stood me back, and he looked down at me, and he was like, "Mama, you didn't even make any sweet tea," and I was like, "No, but I washed, dried, and folded all y'all's clothes and put them up." I said, and it's not like I won't be back. I said, when I come back, I'll make sweet tea. And he was like, okay.
Okay. He was only days away from moving to Texas, wasn't it? He was moving there for a job?
Yeah. I found that out after the fact.
After the fact.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Can you tell us a little about him?
Yeah, I can. Mark was something else. I mean, he was a jokester. He was very family oriented. It was like people would gravitate to Mark, like they would have birthday parties, and he loved to barbecue, and he, anytime they would have something, he would, it would be like they wanted to be around him. And he didn't really like for you to be, like sad and all of that. It's like I told Mark, when my mother passed away and we were at her wake, my niece, was crying, and Mark hugged her, and then he leaned her back and he was like, "Nikki," and she said, "What?" And he told me, "Now look at you. You done got snot and tears all on my shirt." And then we all started laughing, But he was crazy about his kids. My daughter had just had a baby, and you know, he was crazy about his nephew, and he was, you know, he wasn't perfect. None of us are.
Right.
But,
right.
you know, he made mistakes and everything, but he was a guy. You know, it was, I mean, I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Mark. He was a really good guy.
He sounded very down to earth.
He was very down to earth.
Mm-hmm.
And Miss Royce, can you please tell us what happened on January 4th, 2013? How did the day start for you?
It started, you know, like all of my other days. Like I said, my daughter had a new baby, and I would go over to her house and watch Atticus. And so I was over there, and by his parents had gotten home, my cousin would go get her hair done around the corner from their house, and so she would always come over and, you know, visit with Atticus. Well, by this time, you know, everybody was getting home, and Dave had come to pick me up, and it was, Cheryl was getting ready to leave, and I was going outside to, you know, walk her off, you know, give her a hug and all, and walk her off. And my phone rang, and it was 6:16 p.m. And it was Astria, Mark's wife, and she and I used to talk every day, all through the day, text all through the day. And so I answered the phone, and I could tell by her voice, you know, something was off. And so I told Dave, I said, like, I covered the phone and just did with my lips, I'm going to go in the garage and talk to her so I can hear her. And he shook his head. And so I went in the garage and, you know, asked her, I said, what's going on? And she was like, I think Mark just did something to himself. And I'm like, wait, no, I mean, why? What would make you think that? And she said, well, we were texting, and now I can't get him to answer. And I said, well, you know, that's how Mark is. I said, he'll just stop answering, you know. I said, he does me the same way. I said, but he'll just quit answering. I said, especially if you're into it about something or whatever. And she said, well, she was leaving work. She had called her parents to go check on him, and she was, you know, leaving work right then. Well, I stayed on the phone, but I didn't hear anything. Like, I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear keys. I didn't hear the car door close, the car start up, driving noises. I didn't hear anything. And so we were just, like, quiet. And then I knew how long it would take her to get home. And so I asked her in a few minutes, you know, I was like, are you home yet? And she was like, no. And, you know, I got quiet again, and she wasn't saying anything. And she would always, like, I would talk to her every night when she got off at 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And she would always take her seatbelt off before she got home. Like, she could probably see the house, but she wasn't there yet. And so I would always hear ding, 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 and I'd go, put your seatbelt back on, you're not home. Well, I asked, you know, are you there yet? And she was like, no. And then, you know, I asked a few minutes later, I said, are you there yet? And she said, yes, I'm here. And I said, are your parents there? And she said, yes. Well, okay, I didn't hear the ding, 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 nothing. And didn't hear car door close, didn't hear anything. And so I imagine, you know, she had gotten out, but I didn't hear muffled talk, you know, like wait out here or nothing like that. And so she said, they're not coming out. And I said, well, you know, just give them a little bit, and, you know, they probably in there trying to see what's going on or whatever. but inside I was getting shaky, and I'm like, something's not right. Something isn't right. And, I asked, she said it again in a few minutes, they're still not coming out. And I said, well, just wait a minute, just give them time, maybe they're probably talking to him or whatever. And so then she said, he did, and she kind of like that, started crying, I guess. And then her stepmother took the phone and said, Royce, I'm sorry. And then I left Earth.
And and what did she tell you happened? She didn't go no further?
No. She
Okay.
didn't. All she said was, Royce, I'm sorry. And I didn't realize, let me back up. Like, one of the times when I was still standing there when she had said they weren't coming out, my daughter had come in the garage, and she, like, my back was turned to her, and I had my finger in my right ear so I could hear.
Uh-huh.
And she went, Mama. And I didn't say anything. And then she went, Mama. And I turned around, and she started coming toward me, but it seemed like she was coming in slow motion. Well, about the time she got to me was when Mary took the phone and said, Royce, I'm sorry. And, and I just, like I said, went into orbit, and I didn't even realize my phone had fallen off my ear until I saw her looking on the ground, looking for it, and picked it up. And then, I told her, I was like, call him back, call him back. Maybe it's not true. And she called back, and then she just looked at me, and I went, it's true. And then, I took right back off again. But I didn't know what had happened. All I knew was she said, Royce, I'm sorry.
Okay. And is it true that the Leonville, Louisiana Chief of Police, Joseph Noel, waved off the Parish County deputy, telling him he would handle the case because he was a family friend?
Yeah, I didn't find that out until like 2 weeks later, when I started, trying to get a police report and all of this kind of stuff, because like when I went there, I didn't have a reason to disbelieve what I had been told. I mean, because I'm like, why would they lie to me, And so I had looked at my phone. Like I said, she and I used to talk every day. And I was sitting there one night with Dave, and I looked at my phone, and I'm like, she hasn't called me, to see how I'm doing, or if I'm eating, or if I'm okay or anything. And he was like, no. He said, any contact you've had with her, you initiated it. And I looked and I said, oh no, something's not right about this. I said, something is wrong. And so that's when I started trying to call, to get a police report and all of this. And I called Joseph Noel, and he told me that I had to get that from Astria. And that's just exactly what he called her. And I said, well, she doesn't talk to me anymore. And he said, well, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. And I'm like, okay. So I called, kept calling around, and I called the St. Landry Parish Sheriff's Department, and I spoke to Caitlin, and she told me, she checked the records and everything, and she said, we responded, she said, but we, the deputies responded, but they were sent off scene. And I said, what? And she said, yeah. She said, they responded, but they were sent off scene. So that's how I found out.
And isn't it true there's allegations that the chief of police, Joseph Noel, and Marcus's estranged wife was having have an affair.
Yeah, that's what I've been told that word on the street was. There's a teacher out there that I've talked to, and she told me that also. She said, yeah, that was out there, that was word on the street, that even some people have made the comment, that girl and that chief was messing around, and he's involved in killing that boy. And I'm like, what? And she said, oh, yeah. She said, that's what word on the street is. I say, well, they need to get that word to somebody in the right department, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when did you get the first impression that something wasn't right with the investigation?
Well, I got the first impression that something wasn't right when I saw Mark. But I just, in my mind, I hadn't put it all together. I guess that something wasn't right, because I couldn't figure out how supposedly he had shot himself and there was nothing wrong with him. There was no damage to his face, his head, nothing. And the more I asked questions and, tried to dig to find out, it's like walls came up everywhere. And, by then I knew, hey, something's not right about any of this. But they didn't do an investigation.
Right. And when you realized that something wasn't right, what did you do next?
Started Googling, and it became my best friend, and that's how I found you. That's how I found a lot of different people, to try and help. I couldn't get reports. I couldn't get anything. I spoke to an investigator, Apple, with the Attorney General's office here in Texas, and he told me, he said, no, you don't need anyone's permission to get a police report or anything else that you're asking for. Your DNA gives you that right. You're his mother.
Correct.
And he said, call them back and ask for it exactly how I'm getting ready to tell you to. And I said, they're not going to give it to me. He said, call them back and tell them you want that under the Freedom of Information Act. And he said, and let me know what happens. I said, okay. And I called and asked for it that way. Still didn't get it. And I called St. Landry Parish Sheriff's Department, and I can't remember I'd have to look at my notes. I can't remember the deputy I spoke with, and I told him I couldn't get it. And he said, wait a minute. You mean Chief Noel hadn't sent you the police report? And I said, no. He said, well, he should know. He doesn't need anyone's permission to do that. That's a public record. And I said, well, he hadn't sent it to me. And I said, maybe could you call him and see if he'll send it to you and you send it to me? And he said, no, I'm going to call him and he's going to call you and he's going to send you that report. So that's what he did. He called, I guess he called him, and then Noel called me, and he was like, you didn't get the police report? And I answered him just like this. I was like, nope. And he said, oh, well, I mailed it to you. I said, well, it doesn't take mail that long to get here from Louisiana to Texas, and I haven't gotten anything. And so he said that he would mail it again, and then I finally got it.
Wow.
And it was a whole written all in caps, few lines, one paragraph maybe, I think.
Right.
And when I started reading it, I'm like, why are you yelling at me? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the capital letters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all written in caps, and I'm like, why are you yelling at me?
That's
and
so rude.
and
That's so rude.
yeah, and I'm like, there's nothing contained in this report that says we did this and we did this and we took these steps. I'm like, what this is telling me is his wife said this is what happened, and y'all are just like, okay, then that's what happened. That's just how I read.
Yeah, yeah. And Olivia, do you have any questions for Miss Royce at this time?
Just want to add something, and I hope you don't think I'm speaking out of term. I'm kind of suspicious about the ex-wife and the family. You know, number one, somebody said they're sorry to you. I don't know if it was her parents or her. To me, that seems like a confession for harming someone. And it just seems like there's an awful lot of cover-up by the police.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can't figure what the cover-up.
Everything done.
Exactly. Ding, ding, ding.
Police protocol. That's the first thing you do. Find
No,
out
ma'am.
what caused it. You know?
No, ma'am. Olivia, the coroner, Russell Pavage, never even saw Mark.
Oh,
Yeah.
my God.
He
That's
went
another thing.
from the house to the funeral home. This is a 37-year-old, 6'2", 225-pound man with no type of illnesses, nothing wrong with him, who died supposedly at home by himself. He shot himself, and nobody sees any evidence of that. And he didn't have an autopsy. Like I said, the medical examiner never even saw him.
That's totally wrong.
Yeah.
Totally
I know.
Yeah.
Totally wrong.
Okay, folks, we're going to take a short pause for the cause, and when we return, Olivia and I will continue our questions with our special guest, Royce Eckley. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to our MJ podcast, the series, A True Conspiracy. This is Chapter 1, Part 2, The Mysterious Death of Marcus Merritt, Sr. Ms. Royce, in 8 years, how many times have you been contacted by law enforcement?
0.
In 8 years, how many times have... Oh, I made a mistake on that question. My fault. Isn't it true after 3 years, the Louisiana State Police decided they better open up a death investigation, having a fair warning by MJA and Together We Stand what was heading their way as far as a national radio show?
Yes. What they did was on Mark's birthday, they had a national call to action, and that was where people called down there, emailed, asking for an investigation to be done. And I mean, I didn't hear anything from it, and it just so happened one of the moms that I'm connected to on Facebook, one day she sent me a message and she said, Royce, I got this email and I don't understand it, but I wanted you to have it. And it was from Earl Taylor, the former district attorney, and he was saying from his understanding, Mark was to be exhumed and the state of Louisiana paid for it. Well, I'm like, wait a minute. I called you and I called Sevgi, and, both of y'all was scrambling trying to get here or whatever. And I found out that was, what was it, Mark? June 1st? And
yeah, they done it on June 2nd, 2016. And,
right. But I had gotten the email from her or whatever June 1st. Remember, because I called Mark Fournette, and I'm like, I've always said if Mark was exhumed, I wanted to be there. Nobody called me. No, I didn't know anything about this. When is this supposed to be happening? And he told me that the paperwork and all had just been signed, and it was happening the next day.
And isn't it true that MJA Inc. Investigations and Together We Stand told them we wanted a 24-hour notice before the autopsy because you wanted me in the autopsy room?
Mm-hmm. Well, they had been informed that, where you were and that you would need time to be able to get there.
Right.
And like I said, it was not enough time. But after I thought about it, Mark, they weren't going to even tell me.
Right.
I found out by accident.
Yeah, that's another thing about the whole situation. And isn't it true?
Mm-hmm.
They disrespected our wishes, and just by chance, you just made it to the cemetery.
Oh yeah, I left. Like I said, that was June 1st. He was going to be exhumed the next day, and I told Mark, I said, I'll be there, and I left that night.
Okay. And isn't it true that you waited in the hallway while your son's autopsy was being done?
No, I waited like outside. It was like I would go inside and outside. Like if at the place where they were doing it, the lady had made coffee and everything, and so we sit in this room while all that was going on, and then I would go sit on a bench, like that I could see the door where all these people were coming in and out of, but I didn't go in that door.
And isn't it true one of them people coming in and out of the autopsy room was one of my contacts that I had asked him for his help to follow this case?
Yes, I found that out later. It was one of the times when I was walking toward to go to the bench and sit down, and these two men were passing me, and one stopped and he said, asked how I was doing and everything, and I said, I'm doing okay, thank you, and and he kept walking, and when he did, Michelle, who is my grandson's mother, she went, Mama, and I said, what? And she said, you know what he is, right? And I'm like, no, I don't know what he is. And she said, that's a Fed. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? She said, look what he's driving. And I'm like, I don't know what they drive. And she, told me or whatever. She said, and that doesn't have Louisiana plates. Look at that. And I said, well, I don't know. And later on, I found out that was one of your people.
And so the Louisiana State Police, including Mark Fournette, just because you want to go behind our back, that doesn't mean I can't get somebody to watch your ass. And that's just straight up. And isn't it true not long after the Louisiana State Police, after the autopsy, they sent you a flash drive concerning your son's death investigation?
Mark, I don't really know how I got that. Because you had sent in, the request for information like you've been doing, and nobody answers or whatever. Well, when they came and brought me that 3-paragraph letter, to tell me that their determination was Mark had taken his life or whatever. The captain, Kevin Duvall, told me that when he gave me a card, with a phone number and said that's to contact them so I could get the report and everything. And when I got the report, they would be more than happy to answer any questions that I may have, and all. And that was what, December 13th?
Yes.
No, December 13th, 2016.
Correct.
I have not heard from them ever since. And I've, called or whatever, and I'm like, well, hey, I thought, somebody was going to answer questions. I haven't heard anything. Well, I get this after Hurricane Harvey here. That September, I go to the mailbox, and there's this, like a little envelope, little brown envelope, and I'm like, what is this? And it had the little white labels on it. It didn't look professional, like when they sent the 26-page report, that if I had questions, there were black marks all through information, and you told me that's called redacted.
Right. They redacted information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it was a big manila envelope, with professional looking, with Louisiana State Police engraved on there, however it's made. Well, this one, it was a small manila envelope, bubble envelope, and the return address and my address were put on with like a little white label, and I'm like, what are they up to now? What is this crap? Well, when I opened it, it was a letter in there, and it told me that was everything that they had, and it was a little flash drive, and it told me there may be photographs and a video that you may find disturbing. Well, I wasn't going to touch that with a 40-foot pole, and I came right in the house and called Mark and told him, what I had just gotten. And he said, can you send that to me? And I told him yes, and I went and I had a copy of it made, and I sent one to him and one with together we stand. And Olivia, I really don't know where that came from. I have my suspicions. I really don't. I don't think we me that, because
that's an awful thing to send someone. I mean, the mother of the victim. You don't know what's on that flash drive.
Yeah, they could have easily sent it to us.
Yeah, they should have sent it to an investigator, not you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't think those type of pictures you would want to see. That's your son.
No,
I
don't want
to
to
see
see
he
them.
Was.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the thing is, when Sevgate got hurt, because she got her copy before Mark got his, and she called me and she said, Roy, she said, they have been digging into this. She said, they know good and well Mark did not take his life. She said, there's things on that flash drive you were never, ever supposed to even know. And one, we didn't know she had a polygraph test 3 years later. We had no idea of that. Now, why do you give somebody a polygraph test 3 years later? Isn't that something you do at the beginning?
Yeah, right at the beginning it should be done. That same day, should bring those people they're suspicious about right into headquarters and give them a polygraph test right then and there. That's my feeling.
Okay. Olivia, you can ask the questions to me about I can tell you what's on the flash drive.
All right. Okay, what was on the flash drive, Mark?
Okay, there was multiple police reports, but what was strange about it, each report contradicted each other. It was like they wasn't even talking to each other. And then, like she said, there's 2 videos of the polygraph test taken by the estranged wife, and they both were inconclusive, okay, on the 3 main questions regarding Marcus's death. And then you have the 2 videos of the autopsy I watched. Okay. To me, I've been involved in 340 death investigations, and this was not a professional autopsy. The video camera was stuck in a corner. You couldn't even see what they was actually doing to Mr. Merritt. And another thing, there was no recorder. There was no notes being taken. There was people coming in and out, taking pictures of his body with their cell phone. And
Stop right there.
Yeah.
I just want to say something, and Royce, my ex was a detective. He's been in on autopsies. It's usually the doctor and the officer. You're not allowed to take pictures. So right there, something's wrong. Something's wrong.
Okay.
I mean, that is so disrespectful.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah. Okay, go on with the next questions, Olivia. We covered the autopsy. We covered the autopsy with photos and.
All right. Is it true you did a blind study with 5 medical examiners? Just by looking at the death room photos and the tox screen, they all said it was a homicide.
That is correct.
Is it also true that at least 3 of them reported that the victim was incapacitated before his death?
That's what many of them believe. Yes.
All right, so you have 16 staff members who are trained to do this work, 5 medical examiners all saying it's a homicide?
Yes.
What can you tell us about the report that was published by the media concerning the death room?
Well, we have a staff member who's a educated mechanical engineer.
I read that report.
And
And I completely concur with this person.
Yeah. And
I know what they're talking about with the blood splatter. He did not kill himself, I can tell you right there. I don't even think a gun was involved. I agree with this person totally.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. And see, that report happened to get published, and we had 2 other reports from mechanical engineers that said the same thing, but this report was in more detail. And like I said, the media, after we posted it everywhere, the media picked it up, and it was covered in like 5 southern states. And
did the DA see it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he kept contacting me and wanting to know who this person was that wrote the report. And I said, no, I protect my sources. And he says, well, I don't believe there is such a person. And I just started laughing at him, and I says, yes, there is such a person. And I said, yes, they are educated in this field. And I says, you can't go against the laws of physics and gravity. It's impossible. And that's what...
Everything works. I studied physics in school, too. Everything works in reverse.
Yeah.
Not the normal way you would think it would go.
And so can I say something about that?
Yeah.
Where Mark said about that DA, he called me, and that's what he was saying. That report made me think, like I said, that tied it all up in a bow. It made me think about things I hadn't even thought about, because I'm like, wait a minute. If I shoot myself while I'm on this phone with y'all, that's it. I'm unless I shoot myself in the foot, I'm not going to get up and go in the house and sit down somewhere else or nothing.
No.
He would have fallen right where he was. He wasn't going to turn around and sit down. Well, that idiot district attorney, when he called me, what he kept saying was, oh, well, I don't, an investigator doesn't do that. You know, he should tell you who wrote that. And I told him, I said, excuse me, I don't give a damn who wrote it. I don't need to know who wrote it. I said, I'm reading what's contained in it. I said, so what you're telling me is you don't believe it because you don't know who wrote it?
Yeah.
No. And the blood pattern, they said that I remember reading that they referred to Nicole Brown Simpson. The blood pattern was similar, but there wasn't as much blood as in her case. But that's where they came to the conclusion it may have been a knife, not a gun involved.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was, from the blood spatter, when the first injury was made, there was a second injury that spattered the blood also.
Mm-hmm.
So we do know he had at least one contact to the head to make the blood do what it did.
Right.
Yeah. And
Tell her about the bruise on his shoulder, Mark.
oh yes, we had one medical examiner that he noticed deep bruising. And he said the way it was in a downward angle from the back to the front, it was like he was being held down. Yes. And Miss Royce...
And he did this to himself, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Miss Royce, can you please tell us what else you do to keep your son's case alive?
I wouldn't give up, and I won't give up. I just, you know, like I said, I keep reaching out for help. Once you got it, it's like I told Mark, Olivia, I said, I don't trust them. I said, if you prove to me that Mark took his own life, I said, I won't ever understand that. I said, but it was his life to take if that was his choice. I said, but if you do your investigation and you prove that to me, I will accept that. And Mark told me, okay.
He didn't seem like he was going to take his life at all.
No.
Start a new job. No.
Right.
He had children? No.
No. And he was coming home.
Yeah.
So why all of a sudden, if he's getting ready to start a job at the end of January, my birthday is coming up at the end of January, why all of a sudden would he decide to take his life behind somebody he didn't even want anymore?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-mm.
And
No.
isn't it true early on to prove suicide, they done a forensic psychology report on Marcus, but they only interviewed the estranged wife's family and friends?
Yeah, and how do you do a forensic psychology thing on somebody once they've passed away?
Well, that's why it's called forensic psychology. But see, here's what I'm saying. To make this clear, you, your family, and Marcus's friends was never interviewed for this report. Is that correct?
No,
Okay.
that's correct. They've never asked me anything. Even the coroner, when I talked to him exactly 1 month later, he told me, well, his medical history was taken from the wife and from the spouse and the spouse's father. And I'm like, what are you talking about, his medical history? I said, you mean like if he's gone to the doctor and all that kind of stuff? And he said, yes. And I said, number one, what would her father know about my child's medical history? I said, and as far as I know, Mark didn't have any medical history because he didn't go to the doctor.
Yeah. And folks, I want to tell you, to get a better clarity and a positive report on a forensic psychology report after somebody's death, you have to interview both sides. If that is not done, that is a one-sided report by law.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Ms. Royce, in your opinion, what do you think happened to Marcus?
I think he was incapacitated uh, with drugs or however they did it, and his life was taken because Mark was big, and he would have gone to battle with any and everything that came in that door. And they knew that. And the cowards had to get him where he couldn't defend himself.
Right. And isn't it true that all we are asking for is a death inquest or a grand jury to hear your son's case?
Exactly. Yes.
And
we want that done by someone totally unbiased, because that's what the DA told me, talking about, oh, he trusts the Louisiana State Police. Well, I imagine you do. I would trust the Texas Rangers because I live in Texas.
yeah.
And he told me it was independent. No, anybody affiliated with Louisiana that has anything to do with that's not independent. It has to be someone totally not affiliated with that state.
Yes. And do you think that if that ever happened, a death inquest or a grand jury, there would be arrest for your son's murder?
Yes, I do. Because anybody who looks at this says something is wrong. It's like I sent information off everywhere that I could even think of. And I had sent this to a detective in Michigan, I think it was. And he called me and he said, ma'am, I'm going to pray for you. He said that you find answers. He said, just reading this, I can see red flags all over it. He said, but I'm in Michigan, and that is out of my jurisdiction. I even talked to Ann Rule. Y'all know who Ann Rule is, right?
Sure do.
And Ann Rule told me, she said, I have been doing this for a very long time. She said, I'm 80-something years old. I've broken my hip, and I can't travel. She said, would you like for me to tell you what I think happened? And I said, sure. She said, your daughter-in-law was never at work. She killed your son. She said, and then called her parents if they weren't already there, and then the cover-up began. She said, you keep digging. Do you understand me? I said, I understand you.
Okay. And
I agree with her.
And
I agree with her.
And Olivia, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I do. I think this case is totally disrespectful to your son, to you, and your family. And I also pray that you find all the answers you need.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for taking my questions tonight.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, too. Thank you for being here.
And Miss Royce, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I just want anybody, listening, that if there's something else that they think they can, contact you to maybe try and help do, by all means do that. And to Louisiana, I'm not going anywhere until you lock up the people who took my son's life. If you think ignoring me is going to do something, by now, 8 years later, you should have figured it out that it's not.
There you go.
Good for you.
There you
Good
go.
for you. As they say here, you go, girl.
Exactly.
I have a quote for you all. You cannot swim for new horizons until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. William Faulkner. Always remember, folks, that if you ever get bored with nothing to do, well, take a walk deep into the woods. You might be surprised at what you might find. I want to thank our viewers and listeners for tuning in. You have all been so kind. I want to thank our co-host, Olivia, for being on the show tonight. And a very special thanks to our guest Royce Eckley, the mother of murder victim Marcus Merritt Sr. My name is Mark. I was your host for tonight's show. That's the end of our MJ podcast, the series, A True Conspiracy, The Mysterious Death of Marcus Merritt Sr. And we say to all of you, good night from Plattsburgh, New York.